Oh my god, what am I doing? Hi, welcome to Just Thinking Out Loud. My name is Desi-Rae. I'm going to talk about the situation with Antifa and my thoughts on it. Last week, Antifa showed up at a Proud Boys rally and they threw milkshakes at a prominent journalist. He's also an editor at Equate and he does track Antifa and has had altercations with them in the past, from what I understand. He was not just milkshaked, but he was also physically punched, and he ended up with some lacerations in his scalp and a brain bleed, and also he had a torn earlobe hair at the very end. He was not the only person that was injured. There was also another man who wasn't as prominent. Apparently, he was there to protect people who attend these protests a lot, and he was beaten with a crowbar, and there are pictures of him with his face bloody. So Antifa, as I understand them, they went there as anti-protesters because they're against the supposed and claimed, in their opinion, and on other people too, mostly on the left, of the Proud Boys and what they represent. They are against fascism, as is in their namesake, and they are specifically against racism, what they consider a particular form of fascism. I want to define what Antifa is and sort of make some definitions about what they're trying to do. There was a CNN report that I found where they were interviewing a man with the last name Crow, who has been a part of Antifa for a very long time, for 30 years. And apparently they believe that they have to have direct action in order to combat the rise of fascism in the West, and specifically racism. That's a huge part of their agenda. And they see destruction of physical property not as violence. In this particular case, though, Andy wasn't just milkshaked, he was also punched. And that's something to keep in mind, that even though they say that they're trying to have direct action in order to show, I don't know, how horrendous fascism and racism is in wherever their location that they're going to, or the ideas of these people, and because it's such a big deal, they have to take direct action to make some change happen. They are using physical violence, and there are people who condemn them, but they are also more aligned with people on the left. I don't want to say that they are for the left because they are a group of anonymous people. So to define Antifa, Antifa is a group of anonymous, non-hierarchal individuals, this is a definition I found, who are against fascism. Most definitions point out that they're against fascism, and then their namesake literally means that. Some definitions go further to point out that a major agenda is being against racism specifically as well. Because fascism is so central to the stated definition of what Antifa does, I think we should also define what fascism is. So fascism can be defined as a political ideology and mass movement that dominated Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe between 1919 and 1945. It was characterized by extreme militant nationalism, hatred of communism and socialism, contempt for democracy, and a belief in the natural social hierarchy and the rule of elites. There are other definitions of it. Growing up, when I learned about fascism, it was in the context of Italy and Mussolini, and I always associated it with authoritarian rule, totalitarianism, and getting rid of opposition against the ruling ideology through force. I didn't necessarily think of it as being on the right, but the wiki definition does call it a form of radical right-wing authoritarianism and ultranationalism. Other definitions also reference racism, and this seems to be a more modern understanding of the term. I do think personally that fascism is about authoritarianism and totalitarianism, so that doesn't necessarily have to be on the right or on the left, but that is what people say is. They should just call themselves like anti-racism, I guess. And also the fact that fascism does have a connotation with being against socialism and communism. I do see where they can have that alignment because a lot of the right is against things like socialism and communism. However, the key feature of fascism, from what I understand, is being totalitarian, and so that doesn't necessarily have to do with being against a particular ideology, but just that the ideology that you are for manifests itself in a controlling and totalitarian dictatorship sort of way. So considering that, I do have to ask the question, who is being fascist? Because a ruling ideology can be of any kind. Antifa in the West, meaning North America and Europe, they are associated with being opposed to the right and what they see as qualities of the right, such as racism especially that. And a lot of the right do see Antifa as the extreme left, or they will see them as being supported by the left because they take violent political action, even though they say that they're just trying to take direct action. And what they're against is what a lot of the left is against, such as quote unquote white supremacy. I do think that individuals are responsible for their own actions. And even though it's true that Antifa supports many tenets of the left, or the modern progressive left, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can blame the left for their actions. And this is also vice versa, where people conflate, say, like the KKK with the right. Violence is wrong, no matter who commits it, and it can come from someone with any kind of politics. I do think that because diversity and inclusion have become placed as the highest virtues in the West, in response to a lack of reconciliation with the past, in the present, this does mean that standards are not applied equally. I have heard of people condemning Antifa in the past and in the present, but I do think the outrage against Antifa when they commit violence or when they show up, there's like a secret sort of support when you compare it to something like people who show up with tiki torches. I do think that there is a blind spot there. There are potential wannabe white supremacists, but all the attention is hyper-focused on them and not necessarily on what people like Antifa are doing. So what the left reacts to, in my opinion, is not necessarily what they see, but what they are looking for. I do think that in general, we will be more biased towards highlighting an attack if it comes from a tribe that we identify with. That's for both sides of the political spectrum. I'm aware that there are independents and centrists, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of polarization. And for this specific incident, a lot of people on the right were conflated Antifa with the left and vice versa. In terms of the milkshaking thing, there were some people on the left who were saying that the people on the right were propagating a lie because there wasn't actually cement in the milkshakes. And the Portland police were the ones that reported this, but they only heard this from people on the ground. They, however, did not actually recant their statements, so it kind of still stands. And it also doesn't really matter because he was also punched. And also, milkshaking isn't okay. You know, like I mentioned that guy from CNN who was for direct action, and apparently he's been with Antifa he had been, I don't know if he still is, with Antifa for 30 years. So this is something that must be well understood within Antifa, that they don't see destruction of physical property as violence, but it's still a form of physical aggression to milkshake someone. And then it's almost like a mask, like they say, oh, this is what we're for, this is what we're going to do, but then they end up punching someone and giving them brain bleeds. When you start justifying violence, then you've lost the respect for how society is civilized. We use speech to negotiate rather than resort to force. This is the mark of being civilized, because yeah, you can use force to get what you want, but you've built up a society that doesn't do that for good reason. And this hyper focus on racism as experienced in the past, I think, has resorted to a sort of value inversion. So inclusion and diversity are now dominant for many in the mainstream on the left, not for everybody, obviously, but it's become dominant as the highest virtue. And for some people, they think that if you just beat the wrong out of someone that doesn't align with that to the degree that they want, then that's going to solve the problem. And I think it's and many people do, it's very dangerous territory. So once you start justifying violence and it's just based on what someone you think is right, that's a really dark road to go down. It's also worth mentioning the demographics of Antifa, because they do tend to be on the lighter side of the human race. Whatever, but it's a big deal because they specifically came to fight on behalf of non-European ancestral individuals, or against racism or prejudice against non-European individuals. I say it like that because I don't like the word minority. I think it's a euphemism, because minority only means minority in specific countries, since most of the world is actually non-European. And I don't like the term colored, and I'm also just not a normal person because I see the way language is used to define what our myths and narratives are, and then people navigate the world by that, but it's not actually truth. The point is that when you see the demographics of Antifa, it comes off as really hypocritical. And I think that people are drawn to violence due to their own issues, and then they can justify it afterwards, such as people who join the military. I'm not saying that everybody who joins the military isn't safe for actual defense of a country. There's just a lot of overlap and gray area there. I'm not saying that's black and white. In general, though, I do think skin color and the surrounding political issues in the West that people fight for, they're pretty much a tool nowadays for people to gain other benefits like power or admiration or emotional release. That's not totally conscious in my opinion, but it's kind of obvious when you realize, like in the case of Andy, who is gay and a first generation immigrant with Vietnamese parents, and also people like myself and others, they experience the fact that it's not actually about how you look or who you are like they say it is, and people wanting to protect you, but it's actually that they want you to define your story, your identity, and your struggle in the world the way they do. That goes down the rabbit hole of the huge effing fallacy that is identity politics, which is that you can't universalize experience based on identity and statistics. But that's another topic. It's complicated, it's complex. Yes, many horrible things were and are done, especially not in America on the basis of race and ethnicity and things like that. But identity politics is a huge fallacy, in my opinion. And if you watch my content, you'll be very aware of that. So that's what I think about the situation with Antifa. This is going to be one long video, but I realize that there are very distinct topics and it's probably going to be easier to digest if I break it up. So those are my thoughts for now, and I'm going to go make other videos now. If you liked my content, don't forget to subscribe. Also leave a comment. Like, when you subscribe, remember to click the bell because YouTube often does not notify people. People complain about it all the time. Also, please consider donating to my channel because I am 100% funded by people like you who listen and view my content. I would really appreciate that. You could go to justthinkingOutloud.tv/donate. Either way, thank you for watching and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.